Don't go home now and come back in 5 minutes' time thinking I should have gone 10,000 more. It's a long drive home with a cranky woman. I got a fairly bid now, 450 I'm bid, and a $500,000, round it up if you will. And at the back, 550, sold to the man in the back for $550,000.
Yeah. I just made $550,000 on my drink bottle.
Hey, I'm Ange.
And I'm Beck.
And we are the Gold Diggers. Because we believe there's gold found in everyone.
Everyone is unique, interesting and exciting with a great story to share.
And we aim to find it.
The question is, can we rise to the challenge and strike gold?
Honey, you're my sugar.
This podcast today was just such a wonderful podcast for men to listen to. Darren was just so honest and straight from the heart, really, wasn't he?
He was. He suffered financial collapse. He's gone through divorce. He's raising a family with 8 kids. And really talks a lot about some of the mental health challenges he's had with that, identity issues for a man that, has gone through financial collapse. So this is a really good podcast for male and female, that we can understand what does a man go through when he goes through those dark times in his life. So stay tuned, stay with us, and check out Darren's story.
Honey, you're my sugar.
So this is how it works. One of us knows who the mystery guest is and the other one doesn't. And today it's Ange's turn to find the gold in our mystery guest, Darren Lockwood.
So what have you got for me, Beck?
Okay,
tell me a bit about Darren.
I got 3 points for you, Ange. Point number 1, Darren is a father and stepfather to 8 children.
Wow.
8. That's pretty significant. So point number 2, Darren has been through divorce and financial collapse.
Wow,
and point number 3 is Darren has remarried and is building a business in real estate with his wife.
Awesome. This sounds like one of those stories where they've made a comeback.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to getting into this.
I just feel like there's going to be so much we can pull out and...
Yeah, and I'm really intrigued by the 8 kids.
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
You must have a lot of patience.
It's like the Partridge Family.
The Brady Bunch.
Yeah. Well, we should get Darren into the studio. What do you reckon?
Yep, let's bring him in.
All right. Welcome to the show, Darren.
Woo! Welcome, Darren. It's so good to have you. And the first thing I'm really impressed about is you don't even have a grey hair and you've got 8 kids.
I know. If I turn around, you'll see a little bald spot, so that probably makes up for the grey hair.
Are they all still living at home with you?
No, we've got one left at home. So lovely Isabella, she's 20. So
Wow.
it's been a good journey over 16, 17, 18 years. When we got together, my wife and I, this splendid family, there were 3 3-year-olds, 7, 8 and 9-year-old, a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. So now they range from 20, the youngest, to mid-30s.
Wow.
With kids.
So when they were all under your roof,
Yeah.
and you said you had a blended family, so you obviously, when you married your wife, how many were her children, how many were yours?
Very symmetrical. My wife Megan had 4 children, which were 3 girls, 1 boy. And I had 3 boys, 1 girl. So when we put them together, someone said Partridge Family.
Yeah.
Brady Bunch plus 2. It was 4 boys, 4 girls. So it was a really good mix.
Yeah, and how did that transition go for you?
Yeah, no, it was a lot to take on, and I think we jumped into it thinking that it was all going to be warm and fuzzy, and it was great for a period, but the kids were fantastic. They blended really well. I had my children sort of 50-50 shared care with their mum, so we had sort of like 1 week where it was 8 kids, or 7, because one moved out shortly thereafter, but 8 kids 1 week and 4 kids the next week. And they were real superstars. It was magnificent. We tried to create a really nice, fun-loving environment, and they were along for the ride. So it wasn't without its ups and downs over the years, but early on the blending was crazy wild ride.
Well, that was quite fortunate, really, isn't it? Because I've heard so many horrible stories of how that, doesn't always work out in the best way.
Yeah.
But there was obviously a very challenging time prior to that. And, Beck mentioned that you've been through divorce. Is that kind of a very significant period in your life that defined you in many ways or, changed your life in many ways?
Yeah, it did. It sort of took me by surprise as well. It sort of came on pretty quickly, the divorce, and just turned my world upside down. We'd not long started a business. at the time, a real estate business, and we were building that. And I wasn't away a lot or not home a lot, but we started the family, and a lot of kids early. We had 4 children under the age of 5, so it was a real stress just for worldly reasons outside of business and emotional stresses. But those compounded, and it just made it really, really difficult, and happened fairly quickly. So big challenge, turned my life upside down. I didn't know how to handle it. I hadn't had a close friend go through a divorce at all. I didn't expect it. I thought we had a reasonably good marriage. So, it was a real culture shock and very tough time. Very, very, very hard period to go through for at least 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, so you were kind of on your own for that period of time.
Yeah.
So as a single father raising 4 kids at that time, what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
The sort of saying goodbye and the pickups were a real challenge. So probably from a tangible point of view, that meeting in car parks and swapping suitcases over, and just the real sort of pulling them backwards and forwards, even though we tried to make it as amicable as possible, it was a challenge. Saying goodbye to them for the week or week, because early on I was only every sort of second weekend and Wednesday nights. It wasn't for a couple of years that I got shared 50-50. So, and totally took me by surprise. I never had it on my horizon to be a every other weekend dad, so it was real hard. So that was one thing. Then trying to balance, business and then and the children and prioritise them. It was like, shopping was a nightmare, and organising meals and planning that while you were juggling those things. So, very practically difficult, but way far down the list from the emotional struggle that it was. So very difficult.
It's good to hear it from the man's perspective, because often we hear it from a female perspective when there's been divorce and they're raising a family. And I often think men actually kind of get a really difficult time in that period of time. I know a lot is in favour of like the mothers and that, and probably less attention is on the difficulties and the challenges for a father. So it's good to hear from that perspective. Have you got, I know we're very early into the podcast, but have you got advice for dads in that period of time, what they can do? Because you've obviously got a success story and a victory story at the end of that, but through that journey, like what were the things that just kind of held you strong?
Well, I was certainly exploring and developing my faith. So that was significant for me at the time, and really brought that along, so much so that many of my family who don't come from a faith thought that it was a crutch for me, my faith, and that coming along. So, certainly my faith.
How did you find that?
Yeah, it was the fact that they thought it was a crutch for me at the time, or just...
What introduced you to a faith during that time?
Some good work friends. So some work friends of mine, some dear friends, were sharing their faith with me, many years, or 2 or 3 years before my marriage. So it was sort of evolving prior to the marriage breakdown, so it didn't all happen there at once. But I guess I'd, for a period of time, sort of resisted. I had this wall up to accept that there was a creator and have a faith, so I didn't really explore it. Sort of came to me in the head before the heart, maybe in those early couple of years before the marriage breakdown. But then when the marriage breakdown happened, obviously I sort of was spent a bit of time on my knees and crying out, and I guess then it just sort of filled my heart, and then it made sense, and I could feel it where previously I hadn't felt it. So it was more in the headspace. So those dear friends, lifelong friends now, and in fact introduced me to my now wife. So it was a horrible couple of years, but as you say, it evolved into a really good news story over time. Yeah,
we often find that sometimes it's the most difficult and challenging times in our life where we actually can either find faith or are reliant on the people that come around us. It's so important, isn't it, to encourage one another, support one another when we go through difficult times. I think we can undervalue how important that is,
for sure.
and how people can really carry us through, and how important a faith is as well to carry you through those dark times. So Let's go back to early childhood then. Where were you born? What did that look like for you?
I was born in Tassie. I was a Hobart boy, so I've been here since 1995, so I'm almost a Queenslander, I think. So, yeah, I grew up
You're more a Queenslander than I am.
Yeah, so I grew up in Tasmania in a little town called Clarendon Vale, which in Tasmania there's housing commission community. So it was a housing commission community. My mum and dad were into a brand new home back in the early 70s, and so I grew up there for a better part of 20 years in Hobart. I was a butcher in my former vocation, apprentice butcher for 8, 9, 10 years. Mum, dad stayed married. Wasn't always the greatest marriage. They had 50 plus years of marriage, but there was lots and lots of struggles. Relatively working class.
Have siblings?
Siblings. So I have 3 sisters and a brother, but many of those, or all of them, probably bar my brother, grew up before me. There's 9 years between me and my brother, so he was about moving out of home when I can have my earliest memories. So I felt like I grew up like an only child, and many of my brothers and sisters felt like cousins or aunts or uncles. And I was the only child, not that it probably has any relevance in my early story, but I was the only child in my family that grew up the whole time with my mum and dad. My mum and dad had some checkered times. My dad suffered from some addictions, alcohol primarily, and then in and out of jobs. My grandmother, in part, raised my sisters and brother for large chunks of the time. So I felt like
they
I grew
were
up as an only
okay
child.
by the time you came along. Then they'd resolved some of those issues, had they?
Yeah. Dad had stopped drinking, to extreme levels, to probably more a Friday, Saturday night kind of guy, and not that wasn't without its challenges. He was fairly vocal when he was drinking, but instead of it being a 7-day-a-week thing and interrupting his work and so forth, he was, I guess, a little more regular on weekends, and he'd got over that. Mum was able to find secure and more frequent jobs, because she was, like, when Dad didn't earn money, we didn't have any household income, so Mum started to then work second jobs, so financially we sort of got through.
Okay, so as a young boy, obviously you're in this, as you say, working class family. Did you have aspirations in business then?
Yeah, I did. I don't know that it sort of came as a young boy, but certainly in my teens and certainly shortly thereafter when I became a butcher, I thought, because we worked like really long hours, it was 5 a.m. till 6 p.m. at night, and Friday nights we'd work till 9 o'clock, so lots and lots of long hours. So as a young teen and just starting to work, I thought, I've got to find something that I can do that's, work smarter, not harder, and have a business. At that time, I didn't know what it was. I was thinking along the lines of sales. I had some family friends that did insurance and superannuation. Had a distant friend that did auctioneering, which I always found really fascinating. Okay. I loved hearing auctioneers, but which later on
it's
I became
quite a
an
talent,
auctioneer.
isn't it, auctioneering?
Yeah.
And to be able to talk that fast as well. And
Yeah, so there's all sorts of auctioneering, but certainly the cattle calling auctioneering and maybe some car yards, they go that fast you don't know what they're saying. So I just thought it had to be sort of business orientated and work smarter, not harder, and less about the hands and more about the head. But I didn't know what it was.
Darren, I've seen some of those shows where they've done auctioneering, and to me they just sound like blah, 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 blah. Do you know how to do it properly? Because obviously I can't.
We need a demonstration.
Oh, really? So like an auction on the spot, you
Yeah,
reckon?
let's auction up a drink bottle. Here we go.
A drink bottle, okay. Well, I'm in your hands, ladies and gentlemen. Opening bidder offer, if you like. Hat in the bid now, 400,000 on fairly bid. Don't go home now and come back in 5 minutes' time thinking I should have gone 10,000 more. It's a long drive home with a cranky woman. I got a fairly bid now, 450 on bid. At $500,000, round it up if you will. And at the back, 550. Sold to the man in the back for $550,000.
I just made $550,000 on my drink bottle.
No, that's it.
Do you have like phrases that you've got like a whole bank of them,
Yeah,
that's a cranky woman on the way home.
Yeah.
What are some of the ones
the keys
that
are
you
in
use?
your hands now, and it's yours to take them. And no, there's lots of filler phrases, and then there's just little side outside one-liners, but it's much more mathematical than people think, and it's definitely not like the TV shows, or if you watch The Block, that's embarrassing to auctioneers to see what happens on there sometimes.
Really?
So, yeah, there's lots of phrases, lots of comments that you'd make. You'd pull them out when you need to probably soften the mood a bit at the auction.
You know the vocal accents you use, like the, well, I'm not going to do it, but that's obviously a key, is that to get people's attention?
Yeah, it is. I guess every auctioneer is different. Some are a bit louder, some are a bit quieter. There's a bit of a patter for some of them, but I always try and keep it light but professional, so a nice balancing act between the two. And that loud yell every now and again might wake up some people to spend a bit more than they would otherwise thought. The thing about an auction, which is crucial, is that at some point someone's in front, but only for a couple of seconds until somebody takes it off, and it gets very competitive in the right environment. It doesn't matter how bad the auctioneer is, the auction can be great.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I'm fascinated when it's the horse races and it's like, and Fluffy Count is overtaking Pea Soup, and here comes Marshmallow.
If I wasn't going to be an auctioneer, I would have been a race caller, because I grew up. My auntie had the radio on all the time, and I used to just pretend to do that and even do it now as an adult.
But
so
remembering all the horses' names would be funny.
I know, and they give them the funniest names, don't they?
Well, I'm very impressed. Okay, so when was your first introduction into the business world?
Well, I guess from a business world point of view, I was working as a butcher here in Queensland when I first moved here, and then I met a lovely guy, and I started to work in his video store part-time Friday and Saturday nights. And then I realised that he had a computer store as well. And then I also found out he had one or two other businesses, and I thought, well, okay, so what's all that about? And he had multiple businesses, and I thought that was really my first experience of knowing someone that probably had a business or multiple businesses. So I thought that sounds like a great idea, until I checked out that you don't make a lot of money in video stores, and at the time it was about when video stores were starting to turn south in terms of people using a video store. Computers really didn't interest me, so I got introduced actually to a guy who was a customer at the time, who pulled up in a really nice car out the front, really sharply dressed, and asked him what he did, and he said real estate. And so that piqued my interest, and I found out a little bit more about that, and then shortly thereafter, probably a year or two later, I jumped into real estate at the age of 24 or 25.
Okay, so what was that first step look like? What did you do to get on the ladder?
Well, I interestingly picked up a set of cassettes, old audio cassettes by a guy about the power of positive thinking, and his name is Bob Proctor, who recently passed just a few years ago, and the series was called You're Born Rich. And I got a hold of them at about 3 o'clock in an afternoon after working at the butcher shop, and I started to play them. There was 8 or 9 of them, and it went for 11 or 12 hours.
Back in the days of cassette tapes.
And these were a recording
and video
of
stores.
And they were a recording of a live studio seminar, so there was lots of squeaking on the chalkboard that you had no idea visually what he was drawing. Anyway, I pressed play, and 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 cassettes later, at 3 in the morning, I finished. I listened to them in one sitting, and it sort of opened my mind to the fact that there is opportunities, and it starts from within your own thinking, and if it's going to be, it's up to me. And it got me down a personal development sort of journey some 500 books later, a decade or so later. But that was the catalyst that made me think, right, I've got to stop exchanging time for money and do something better. And I attended a what do they call it, a careers evening at a real estate office down in Caloundra, and I rocked up. I was probably the youngest there by 15 years, maybe 20 years, and I asked a few of the right types of questions, and at the end they were going to do a call back to everyone and invite 2 or 3 back for an interview. But the then principal licensee at the time, when I was walking out the door, grabbed me by the collar and said, "Come here, I want to have a chat with you." And then had a further on-the-spot chat and offered me a job straight away, which was great. It was commission only way back in the day, it was 6 or 7 months of no income. At the time, my first wife, fiance at that stage, was working in Woolies a few days a week, so we had a little bit of cash behind us, but it quickly disappeared when you don't have money coming in. So that in itself was a challenge, and many people probably during that period of commission sales and not getting an income for 6 or 7 months would have probably picked up the knives again. And my parents said, "What are you doing, Darren?" But I stuck at it, and I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite like if you're in a relationship, you're trying to build your life, that's a very big challenge to take on. You must have really believed in yourself that you could see the future in real estate, and you were prepared to do that.
Yep. Whether I knew it was going to be in real estate was probably a little bit of a wait and see type of thing, but I just knew that I was going to succeed. I was so fired up about the series of cassettes that I'd only listened to literally a couple of months earlier. And previously, whatever I'd put my hand to, I did fairly well at. So I thought, if anyone can make it, I can. There's no reason why I can't, and I just needed to stick fat and do it for long enough. But yeah, there was a few times where I thought, ooh, maybe I shouldn't.
And what were other people saying? Like your fiance at the time, were they in support of this?
My fiance was, because I think she could see perhaps a little bit more about that decision and how fired up I was, and I had posters around the wall of parts of the future successes that we wanted to have, and she could see that I was really energised. So I think she was certainly okay with it. But my family, fairly old school thinking, were, you got a trade, Darren. You're a really good butcher, and why don't you stick to that? And I never asked anyone for any money, so it wasn't like they were shelling out money and then saying, we need to put a callback on this at some point. They just thought, how long can you go without money? So some of my biggest fans, my mum and my brother and 2 or 3 others, sort of said, "Are you sure?" They weren't saying you shouldn't or you should stop. They just said, "Are you sure that you can hang on to this and keep the dream alive?" And I did, but it wasn't without doubts.
Yeah.
So after the 6-9 months, you got your first commission, and then what happened from there? You've obviously grown in real estate since that time.
Yeah, I grew. It was still commission sales back then. Many people now have the safety net of a retainer-based commission, debit, credit, or otherwise. So those commissions, when they started to come, took a little while. They were a bit few and far between. But in my second year, I tripled or quadrupled what my typical butcher wage was, so I knew that it came good at some point. And then within a few years, it sort of stayed consistent, and we had a slightly better quality of life. I wasn't able to bank too much, but we did get into our first property in, I forget the year, but probably late 97, 98,
How
99.
old were you?
Nearly 30, so 29, maybe 28. So, yes, it just became more consistent, so a better income and more consistent. And then I still had this desire to continue to do better. I became an auctioneer, but that didn't add a lot to the income space, because it sort of just complements what you do in real estate. And at the time, my employer, who was a long-term real estate agent, had thought about retiring and selling. His business was way too big for me to buy, but it gave me the thought to maybe look for a small business to buy and have as my own. I had that desire. So, a couple of years later, I did. I bought a very small business in Kawana Waters, real estate business. And then we built that over a few years to be quite a successful business. And that journey wasn't without its troubles either. We're eating paint off the wall a few times there when the early days, paying staff. And real estate's a very unique business from a cash flow point of view. You don't have continuity or consistently early on. You're paycheck to paycheck almost.
And it's seasonal, isn't it?
Seasonal, and a lot of overheads early, sort of building it up, ramping it up. But we did well. A few years later, we went from we were with a Rain and Horn franchise, which is probably not so well known on the coast now, but there were 8, 9 or 10 offices on the coast back then. There was 600 nationally. We were number 1 in Queensland for 2 or 3 years and top 5 nationally. So we had some successes. Took us about 4 or 5 years. So that really felt good.
Awesome. So Beck mentioned there was a time that you had some financial collapse. So was that after this period? Where did that fit?
Yeah, so it was probably a combination of things, and it was over a 2 or 3 year period. So it was a lot about the GFC. So when the GFC happened, our then successful business, our income stopped by about 70%, literally overnight. It fell off a cliff, and we were geared up. We had borrowings, and we had almost 20 staff, and You know, our fixed overheads were nearly a couple of $100,000 a month way back then. So that turns very quickly when your income stops. That sort of prompted a decision then to sort of sell and get out of the business, which we successfully sold and paid off all debts. But it coincided with a divorce where, you know, I had to, you know, the Brady Bunch or the Partridge Family, as you say, there's a couple of trolleyfuls of groceries a week, and we had to find and buy a home. So I borrowed a lot of money at probably the worst possible time, and it was delayed by 2 or 3 years, but eventually I couldn't sustain it, and it was much more expensive than I thought to raise a big family, and a couple of other little sideways challenges meant the banks ring you and say, well, we want our money back, and as much as you don't want to give it back, they take it, and so we did. We had to have a reset. We had a couple of resets really in close time from one another.
So if for a man that's raising a family, you've ran a successful business, that time must have really been very significant for you, and a very difficult time, probably even mental health wise. What did that look like for you, and what were some of the keys that you helped you get through those stages?
Well, it was a real challenging time, and I look back on it and I'm convinced that I was suffering depression, but at the time was hell-bent on not declaring that. I call it some time on the couch. I became very antisocial, so we were still in our home at that time, but when the money stops and you need to sell the house and you need to downsize cars or even have one car taken from you, those are things that aren't so public to people until you socialise and they go, oh, Darren, how's real estate going? Or, oh, you changed cars, or why did you guys move? And I guess to avoid answering those questions and to then come clean that, you know, things weren't so great, I tried to avoid any social contact. So, you know, we get invited to things and we sort of pull back a little bit from church, and certainly anything social I just didn't want to go anywhere near. And then I got really in my own head about that failure, and, you know, I got really challenged personally. I didn't turn to any drinking or gambling or any other issues, probably other than just pulling away. We lived on an acreage home that had a bitumen drive, a long bitumen driveway, and there was a cattle grate that when someone would drive over it, you'd hear the butta-butta. And every time I heard the cattle grate, I thought, oh my gosh, who's coming to knock on the door, pin a notice to the door, or take a car, or worse, serve some papers. So I didn't want to step out and socialise much, and then I sort of cringed any time someone was coming up the drive. So very challenging.
It sounds like a lot of trauma, like if you're reacting to great sounds and things like that. How did you kind of cope through that?
Well, difficultly. I certainly stuck by my faith, even though that it was a real challenge. I thought, right, did God have a calling on my life that wasn't what I thought it was? And then I sort of had this divide of ideas: am I to wait on God to say, okay, what is it you want me to do, and I'll do it? But there wasn't any audible voice, and there wasn't any conversation. So I spent a period of time just sort of sitting on the couch trying to think, why am I going through this, and what's going to be the outcome?
Because you knew you had a purpose, but you weren't sure at this stage what that purpose was.
Correct. And, I've got a marvellous wife. She is just an absolute trooper, and she was such a great support, and we didn't openly share with the kids what was going on, but at the same time tried to share a little bit about why things were getting turned off or turned down or taken away, and keep spirits high. So we tried to concentrate on making sure that the family unit was happy and bubbly all the time, and we could do that only till about 9 o'clock at night when they're all in bed, and then we'd trot off to bed, and then lots of time in prayer and asking really what and why we were going through this, what was the benefit or what was the outcome. And at that time there was really no sort of response. It was, or at least I didn't think there was a response of why and how come we were going through what we were going through.
When did that start breaking for you? When did you start seeing the light come back in? Coming back in.
To be honest, probably connecting back in with church. So, and accepting that I needed to socialise again, and not being fearful of, people's thoughts and what the public were thinking. Not that we were public people, but just when you get out in public, you try being in real estate, the very first question that everyone asks is, how's the real estate market? How's it going? You're making plenty of sales. And those weren't questions that I wanted to answer. So, getting back into our church and our extended church family and accepting that whatever was going to come would come and not trying to hold off on it necessarily. So we were battling this financial strain, but we just had to sort of let go, and that meant, okay, we've got to accept this. And we did. We wasn't through our choice, but one creditor in particular filed for us to become bankrupt, and we did. So there was a break, I guess, if you think of the pressures and the stresses I was going through, and it really felt good to go, okay, I'm accepting this. I'm not having to open up mail anymore or wait for a knock on the door. We sort of went through that journey and that process of a financial reset, which when I started to go into it, was pretty horrible, but looking back on it now was what we needed to do.
I often think for men, a lot of times their identity really is in what they do and being able to provide for the family. And so bankruptcy, I think, is so much difficult for men in particular. How much of that was like there was a change of identity for you? Like, was that a struggle that you had?
Yeah, it was, because I mean, I'd only 10 years earlier was fired up about being successful in business and highly energised and without a faith, mind you. I was purely looking in secular ways to succeed and going down the personal development and all the books and tapes and cassettes. And I just had such an energy that I knew I was going to succeed. But when ultimately I didn't, it was just a real wake up for me, and I just started to doubt myself and really get challenged about how and what I'd be able to do again. Would I be able to do it in the same career? How am I going to feed my family? You know, how am I going to get by? So it was more than likely something that we needed, but it was still very hard to go through.
I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I feel like there's so many men out there going through this silently and they don't know how to talk about it. I think it's more common than we know. So it's really good to have you vocalising, putting into words what that process is like for a man.
And it's very, you feel numb. It's almost like an out-of-body experience. I'm certain and convinced you've had chats with people that have been through huge life-changing traumas and stresses and things like that. And I'm thankful to God that we've got healthy kids and a healthy marriage. And look, if it's take my money, then take my money. We will survive. We'll get on. But nonetheless, when you're going through it, particularly as you say, as a male, it's pretty shattering on your confidence. You don't know who to talk to because you don't want to really chat about those kinds of things. I know lots of ladies find comfort in airing all and getting good counsel from girlfriends, and maybe guys are a bit more in that space today, but certainly most sort of keep it within, and at some point it cracks. And that's why I think there's many guys that suffer and struggle with, you know, trying to get out of debt by borrowing more money, and that might be a revolving door of getting into further financial stress, or they could turn to alcohol or drugs, or just get really frustrated and ultimately end marriages, and many maybe end more things, you know.
So when you were going through these really difficult times as a family, I guess as a parent we have this balance of what do we reveal to our kids to expose them to real life, but what do we withhold to protect them from real life? Where was that balance for you, and how did you figure that out?
Yeah, you're right. At the time, I think my wife and I were slightly differing in opinion about what to share, because when your financial world gets tips upside down, sure, you can hide to a certain degree, certainly your emotions, you can keep a straight bat, and but you know, if you've got to change your lifestyle, you know, there's not any overseas holidays, or you know, the Christmas presents have downgraded seriously, or we sold the kids motorbikes, and you know, various things like that. You can't hide that. So I wanted to do a bit of revealing, and my wife would rather not. So I guess it was a balancing act, picking what it was, and for us it was more about letting them know from a business sense that you go through challenges and you've just got to sort of rebuild and fight back. And when you are doing that, you've got to make some decisions. So becoming more frugal with money, better decisions about perhaps some of the lifestyle choices that you make. So because they were varying ages, the young ones probably wouldn't get a financial planning 101 workbook analysis, but some of the older ones who were, saving for cars and in jobs, we just talked about not overextending and making sure that you've got money for a rainy day and all of these things that are in like the Barefoot Investor book, all of these fundamental truths, we shared that with the ones that could receive it. It was a fine line, a balancing act, depending upon their age.
What about emotionally? Because your emotions would have been probably visible to the kids as well. Yep. So how did you handle that part of it?
Yeah, it was a real challenge because, I was going through a lot and, often guys, when they're going through things, things bob to the surface. And for me, it was probably being angry and losing it on occasions. And often it was hard for the kids to, like an example, kids would leave a bike laying around and I'd throw it over the fence. Yeah. Well, I wasn't angry about the bike being left around. I'd just been, stressed about something else. And that was the thing that triggered it. So what I had to do was circle back and say, certainly to the younger kids, that I wasn't angry about the bike. Dad wasn't frustrated about that, and it wasn't directed at them. It was just going through some challenges, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And apologising, one-on-one, not sitting all 8 down and sharing what had happened, but, sharing that something about my day and something about life, made me angry, and that was what the outcome wasn't.
I think that's so important because as parents we do lose it sometimes. All of us do it. I've done it with my son, and I think the important thing as a parent is that we own it when we're in the wrong or we've done something or we've reacted in a certain way. And we've always tried to model that to our son, that if we've spoken out of turn or something, that we actually say, hey, we really apologise for that behaviour. Because they're going to be in that position at some point in their life too. And if you've modelled that, it's not okay to have those moments, but you're going to have those moments in your life. And this is what you do as a result of those. So, yeah, that's great. Because obviously you've built such a strong and beautiful family. But to have walked through that journey shows that, those moments have reaped their rewards in the future with your family. So the third point that Beck brought was that you are obviously back in real estate, building another business. So you're back in that confidence zone that you can do this, that you can, build a successful business. How do you shift from failure, as you've said, into, okay, let's give this another crack?
Yeah, interesting, because I guess it's a timing thing basically on our family journey, because many of the kids have left home, so that allows you to then afford either more time to invest into building something. This time round I'm doing it full of faith rather than full of personal development library, and I know I can do it. It was just probably not having the spare time to do it, because raising 8 kids, it's like three and a half families. It was a lot of time. So and my wife and I are doing it together. So previously she was working in a different job, but she got her real estate license late last year. So we're doing it as husband and wife, and we're doing. A friend of mine said to me once, "You'll make most of your wealth within a decade in your lifetime," and it sort of happened a little bit in my 30s. So I'm hoping most of my wealth-making days are in this current decade, so I can catch up. Got a bit of catching up to do. So, great wife, doing it with my faith this time, and in something that I've, by and large, done for 25 years. So I'm very confident. It's just starting that journey now. We're a year into a 10-year journey.
Okay, and so have you got a real estate agency here? Have you established one?
No, I haven't established a physical location, so I'm working under a brand, so like a franchise, and we are basing ourselves geographically in the hinterland as a husband and wife team, so answerable to ourselves but working within the brand. And I feel that this time around, rather than... Because to be frank, when we were making money last time, when our business was successful, cash flow was great, the revenue coming in was brilliant, but we weren't keeping a lot of the profit because we were investing into that business. So So this time it's about doing it with a certain efficiency. Not having to manage staff is going to be a real difference this time around. So rather than the physical office managing staffing and building perhaps a rent roll or a real estate business, we're doing it as a commission-based business, but building a 10-year brand within a brand out in the hinterland.
Awesome. Now, I believe that nothing is ever wasted. And so even the positive experiences and the difficult times in our life, they all contribute towards the future. And so I think, even some of the things you realise that you did wrong the first time, you're that much wiser and more equipped and prepared to avoid those pitfalls this time, which actually puts you in a much stronger foundation and standpoint to try again. So, I always believe that there's nothing is ever wasted. And we've often... With podcasts, all the guests that we've spoken to is often in those real challenging times where life threw them a curveball and they found themselves in a place that they never thought they would be, that they actually learnt the greatest lessons and they found who they were to a deeper level, that that was an important time in their life. But it's only looking back and reflecting that you ever really see that. Do you feel that is perhaps the case for you?
Yeah, I look back and I think maybe God's journey for me was to come out the other side with that wisdom. I think you don't know how people are experiencing something unless you've experienced it yourself, I often feel. And you're right, I'm a big believer in when you're going through it, the important thing is to share. So if anyone's going through financial challenges and marriage challenges, especially as a guy, to share, but they can't share unless there's somebody to share it with. And I don't know necessarily whether always, professional counselling is a good idea, because there's this disjoint that the person may judge, or that it's a professional level. You just need to find somebody who you can trust in, a friend, a family member that's perhaps been through it and can hear you. So maybe now I'm that person I can hear, and twice or three times this week already I'm chatting with people that are going through similar troubles that I've gone through, and maybe that's the silver lining for having gone through it, that I can help some other people.
That sounds
it usually works that way, doesn't it?
And there's so many success stories of people who have started their financial success midlife, having gone through things like that. So there's a lot of hope for you.
And it's not the business side of things. As we build that'll be a success story. But already the blended family, and I know you guys touched on it, but our blended family, you meet any of our kids, most people will tell you they're a great bunch, and we've done a great job. It's been probably the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's you're going through it. You can't believe how difficult it is. And it was more work than I thought it was going to be, but it was such enriching and
a very difficult time in your life too. So all of that combined to have built a very, a great solid family is an incredible achievement.
Because sometimes that can bond family closer, doesn't it? When you go through hard times together and you have to overcome challenges together, that's what makes you close sometimes. So
you don't think it at the time, but certainly down the track you do, and you're right. So the blended family would be my biggest satisfaction, the thing that I'm proudest most of. It was a real challenge, but we got there in the end. It was fantastic. I mean, my mother-in-law says you don't know you're a parent until your kids are 30, because then there's a whole different layer of challenges that happen, and we got two that are 30, and obviously they start families, and then you've got to go around again with your wisdom as a grandparent, and that's starting to happen.
How many grandkids do you have?
We have 2 and 2 on the way.
Yeah.
And so we've calculated with 8, if they all have the average number of children, we'll have 74 grand and great-grandchildren. So
I hope you've got a big table.
We have
That's a big Christmas.
Lots of big
Sounds
Christmases.
awesome though. Hey? We've done well to blend the two families together, and they've all got along by the sounds of it. So that's really remarkable. So Ange, do you think we're ready for some gold?
Yeah, let's get into it. Like, Darren, when I hear your story, I think the thing that stands out the most to me is your drive. You've got a lot of drive, and that has really propelled you forward in your life. But it's not drive for material things, it's drive for purpose. And I love that story of you listening to those tapes, and you captured something that just made you, put you into, top gear to want to achieve that. And I love that strength that it took for you to go through that 6-9 month period when everyone else was probably telling you, what are you doing, Darren? You need to earn a wage. But you had such belief in the future that you saw that you were prepared to go through whatever. And I don't think that resilience has left you even when it didn't work out for you. You know, you've still looked for it in other ways. You've looked for it personally in how you've personally reflected, and you've reached out and you found your faith, and your perspective on your family is the most important thing. And so I think that it takes a lot to get back on the wagon. Actually, most people say fall off the wagon, don't you? No, get back on that step and that's because there's this underlying drive within you that knows that you have a purpose that you haven't yet seen, and that there's more to come for you. And I think your faith and your family have played a massive big part in that for you, which has enabled you to pick yourself up from the depths sometimes, from things that would have taken people out and wiped them out. You've been able to pick yourself back up. God's helped you with that. Your family's helped you with that. But this drive to see the future that you see for your family is what is propelling you forward, and I think that's just an incredible thing. And it's such a testament to men, particularly men that struggle to talk about some of the difficult things. And I think you've been a great encouragement today to encourage guys to talk to mates, to talk to friends, to reach out to one another, because there is light at the end of the tunnel and you can get through these things. So it's a great story that you have. Thanks for sharing it.
No worries. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No
It's
worries.
so great, and so great to know that you're helping people all the time with this, with your experience, and that's got to be a massive encouragement to everyone you talk to. So thank you for coming into the show today.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So that's it for today's podcast. You'll find us on all the major podcast platforms. The podcasts come out every Wednesday. We'd love to hear from you on our socials, the Gold Diggers Podcast. Tell us about your story so we can find the gold in you.
Easy as pie, lemon, apple or cherry. Loving you is so very sweet, sweet, sweet. How can it be such a piece of cake? And your smile is the icing. Loving you is a poem. Honey, you're my sugar.